Royalty, royalty, power to the chosen people.
Shalom, shalom, and welcome to Biblical Hebrew Lesson 3. Today we're going to look at what you should know so far. So if you've kind of been watching the videos, you can tell that I do not spend a lot of time on the information that is in the Learn Biblical Hebrew book for a couple of reasons. One, I don't want to be repetitive. And second, I believe that it's pretty self-explanatory. So what we're going to go over today is what you should know so far from your personal study. Because I'm actually going to challenge you to pick up the pace in some of your personal study so that we can start looking at biblical passages and we can look at how to study them and how to translate them with aids. Now, we're not at a place yet where we can just pick up the text, read it, and translate it, but I am going to bump you a little bit further and expect that you should know all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and their sounds. And what I'm going to put in the lesson handout or download packet is a key chart for the vowel points. So we're actually going to start moving into looking at passages, taking what we know the consonant sound to be from the alphabet letters, and then looking at the vowel points, and then going through a Hebrew text if you have a Hebrew Bible, or I can put in a practice sheet, and actually going through and sounding them out. This might take you some time, but it's the practice. It's getting you to recognize the vowel points in the text and to pronounce the sound that follows them. So, just to reiterate on what I said, you'll have a text to read. You should know all of the consonants, but you can also use your Hebrew chart if you don't. And you'll also have just a chart with just the vowel points and their sound. So we'll probably use Genesis 1:1 since it's something that a lot of us are familiar with. We'll take that with our vowel point chart, and all I want you to do is go through and follow the rules that are laid out for the sounds, and then just make the sounds and try your best to string together the sounds into the word. So if it's Bereshit, then you would look at your bet in the beginning, make sure it's the B sound, and then you would go be, and then literally just like we're in kindergarten. So it's going to be kind of fun, a little reminiscent, and very frustrating. Part of the frustration, though, is that as you work for it and as you are able to see and pick up these sounds, you'll begin to read. So it's once again that whole idea of like a child. We're returning or going back to a childlike phase where we are learning and going through all those phases that we actually don't remember when we were learning how to speak English, because it was something that was done very early. So this time we're going to go through it and do it and enjoy it and be frustrated and stop and want to throw the whole thing away. But each step that you take in this journey is leading you to something bigger and something better, which is being able to pick up your Bible and you're in Hebrew and begin to actually read through it. And just like when you began to read as a child, what happens is you don't know all of the words, and that's why a dictionary was such a big tool for us as we began to read and began working on comprehension and defining these words and being able to relate what we read back to a person. So we're getting ready to get into that phase, but first we have to know how these things sound and how to string them together and form the sounds. It's not about perfect pronunciation. That's not our goal at this time. Our goal is to begin to say these words. One of the verses that stands out to me a lot, and it's really important to what we're doing right now, because the verse that hits that smoldering wick will then ignite it and will actually bring forth light. So that's what we're doing. Right now we're trying to become a smoldering wick. And as we show you that we are actually putting forth the effort to do this, trust me, he's going to open up the word. But we have to, faith is supporting. Give Yah something to work with. As we put these letters and these words in our hearts, we're giving Yah something to work with. It's substance. The Hebrew language is the substance of the universe. It is the thing that is it is the word that is created that allows everything in our visible universe to be as it is. And so as we begin speaking these words and putting them into our bodies, we're adding life into our bodies, and we're adding something that Yah can work with. He can take the construct of these words and begin then to renew our minds and transform our hearts into what he wants it to be. So knowing all your vocabulary right away is important, because once you put the aleph bet in, and as you begin recognizing it, Yah can take that and do so much more with it than having nothing at all. So I did all that because it's going to be very, very frustrating at first. But I want to put forth the challenge because I want to move into some areas where I know people are really passionate about. I've had people ask me about other videos and what is that process like? And before I can really share it with you so that you can understand, I need everyone to kind of be on the same page. Where if I point out something, or if I say, see how this is here and this means this, I want us all to be on the same page. So we'll spend the next few weeks really focusing on that. I'm going to take a break from really focusing on the letters and what they mean, because I believe with personal study through the Hebrew chart and with the previous video where I go through and make all the sounds for the letters, that you'll understand that. We got the final forms, we're going to work on the vowel points, and after we get that down, it's not being perfect at it, but it's actually having a knowledge base to build upon. Then we can move forward, and what I'll talk about won't necessarily sound like gibberish. So today we're going to look at what you should know from your personal study, and then I'm actually going to show you how to uncover the root in a word. Now the interesting thing about this is this also takes practice. So I'm going to give you a couple of words in your homework where you'll go through and you'll actually uncover what the root of the word is, because it's really important to be able to find the root of a word when you want to look at it in a dictionary. So you might have a word and you're like, oh, I'm going to look for this whole word and I'm going to try to find it this way, and you'll never find it. So we're going to actually work on that, because I want to be able to give you words that you can begin looking at in the ancient Hebrew lexicon, and I want you to begin to play around with it. And I know that sounds weird, but the way Hebrew works is that we can take words, let's say the word, and I'll write it down. Okay, so let's take the word Shem, which is the word for name, so I'll write it on here. So let's take the word Shema. So you have a word, and it has 3 letters, right? And so that is actually not it's a root word where you have Shema, but there's actually a 2-letter root within that root. And that's one of the things you'll learn from the book, but you need to be able to find it. And so some people might say, oh, it's the beginning and the last one. And some people might say, oh, it's the second one and the last one. See what I mean? But really it's these 2. And that seems pretty obvious, but it's not always that obvious. And what we'll begin to do as we move through our lesson today is do something similar to this, where you can take this right here, this 2-letter root, look in your ancient Hebrew lexicon, and figure out what this word means just by breaking these apart. We can go letter by letter and get a pretty close understanding, but it doesn't always work that way. So you can say shin, eat, consume, destroy, or to separate, or to take away from. And you can go mem, okay, water, chaos, motion, ion, see, I, experience, and you kind of don't get the whole thing. So what the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible does is it allows you to look at these things through a concrete form and through the eyes of the ancient Hebrews. But what will begin to happen is you'll begin to do that naturally. And so that's the blessing in being able to do this. So we're going to look at what you should know so far. So you've gone through in your learning biblical Hebrew, and you should have made it at least through lesson 4, 5, or 6 if you've been kind of pushing yourself, but definitely lesson 4. So you should know the aleph, the bet, the mem in its final form. You should also know the yod, the nun sofit in its final form, the hey, and you should know the lamed. You should know the vav. And so those are the ones that you should know pretty much so far. So I'm actually going to write them out here. So you should know the aleph, the bet, the mem sofit, the yod, the nun sofit, the lamed, and the vav, or the wa. These are the ones you should know so far, which is a very, very good place to be because there's a lot of words that use these letters. So actually, as we start moving forward at a faster pace, you should have a pretty good knowledge base. Okay, so you also learned, and I left it off of here, the hey. The reason why I left it off is because we're going to look at this quite a bit today because it's very important to a lot of words when you're uncovering the root of the word. You also learned some vowel points. The vowel points you learned so far are the patak, the tisrei, the charik, the shva, the segol, the cholam, and the sharut. So these are also the vowel points that you've learned thus far. There's also some rules that you've learned. So you also should know that when a word in Hebrew has, when a letter in Hebrew has a dot in the middle, it doubles the sound. So instead of saying he ne, it's hin ne. So the N sound is doubled in this word. You also learned a couple of prefixes, but actually, I'm going to share with you all the prefixes for the sake of translation. So we're also going to look at a passage of Torah, or the Tanakh. So we're also going to look at a passage of the Tanakh. And in this passage of the Tanakh, we see how the Hebrew alphabet is used in order to, one, teach, but also we're going to look at a passage where the Hebrew alphabet is used all throughout the passage. This passage is Psalm 119. If you open up your Bible, whatever one you have most of the time, but definitely a King James Version, you notice that Psalm 119 actually is written according to the alphabet. Now most people on the surface say, oh, okay, there's Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, and it works its way through. What's very, very interesting about this passage is you don't see the genius of the psalmist until you look at it in Hebrew. When you look at the passage in Hebrew, and I'll actually keep it up here for a second so you guys can actually do it, and you can see something very interesting. It's not that the whole bulk of the passage is Aleph, or the whole bulk of the passage is Bet, but the genius of the psalmist is that each individual line of the psalm and in its stanzas begins with the Hebrew letter that it is representing. So if it's Aleph and you're starting at Psalm 119:1, then for 8 verses, it'll start with an Aleph. And then when you get to Bet, for 8 verses, it will continue beginning with the Bet in each verse. And it continues like that all the way throughout the psalm. So this is the beautiful picture of how the alphabet that we're learning is used. So this week, my challenge to you is to look at Psalm 119 and go through and look at each place where the Aleph is used in Hebrew. And then you're actually going to go back and then read the whole thing in English and see what the psalmist is talking about. And if you can see any connections between those Alephs used in the Aleph passage and what the psalmist is talking about, and those bets used in the bet passage and what the psalmist is talking about, and see if the Aleph is representing what it's representing in that word. Okay, now we're going to look at uncovering the root. One Hebrew word may contain a root, 1 or 2 prefixes, and 1 or 2 suffixes. Now this sounds like a lot, but because these words are pretty consistent as prefixes and suffixes, we'll be able to see them and easily pull them out in order to find what the root of the word is. So we'll look at the word So the word here so it's Y, or Y, or Vi, Deb. So the word is Vadebarim. And so the word is, Vadebarim. And so we're going to look at what parts of this are a prefix and a suffix in order to show you how this exactly works. In order to show you how this works. So we know that Vav means and. So the most common Hebrew suffixes are and, in, like, which or who, from, to, and the. And so the and is represented by a vav. The in is represented by a bet. The like is represented by a kaf. Which or who is represented by a shin. A mem represents from. The lamet is there to represent to. And the hey represents the word the. So when we see these in the beginning of a word, we can see what they're actually saying in the word. So these are your most common prefixes and their most common meanings. So the words also have suffixes added to the end. And there are some exceptions, but most of the time the suffixes are showing the gender of the noun that the word is talking about. So the suffixes at the end, more often than not, show the gender of what the word is saying. But there are some examples. For example, ab and or, which represent father and light, are masculine words, yet they have a feminine ending. So or is orot, and ab would be abot if it was if it had a suffix to make it plural. So the plural suffixes, for the most part, which is, I mean, it's a pretty hard and fast rule, and there are some it's a pretty this is a rule that can easily be followed, and there are some exceptions to the rules, as we've seen with those two words, and there are a few others, but it'll come naturally as time goes. So plural suffixes are im for masculine and ot for feminine. So im, masculine, ot for feminine. So I'm going to show you a list of the most common prefixes, infixes, and suffixes that are added to a root to form a new noun. Each noun derivative will be related in meaning to the original root word. So it doesn't matter how many things are added to the beginning or how many things are added to the end, the definition of the root still stays the same, and it is then shown out by the beginning and the endings that are added. So if you add a lamed in front of the root, does it change the definition of the root? It tells you to, and then this particular word. If you had a mem in front of the root, then it's going to say from and this particular word. It's not going to change the meaning of the word. It just gives you some by recognizing these fixes, prefixes, infixes, and suffixes, one can easily uncover the original root word, assisting the reader with identifying the meaning of the word, because it is the roots that carry the meaning. The very interesting thing about Hebrew, and we'll move into this pretty much after we understand how to uncover the roots, we'll move into how you only have to know about 1,800 roots. And I know that sounds like a lot, but we know more words than that in English. You only need to know about 1,800 root words to be able to pretty much understand, uncover, and define pretty much any word in your scriptures. So once you know those roots, and we'll do that in the form of vocabulary, then you'll be able to say, oh, the root is this, and it just has a lamed at the beginning, and it's a plural masculine at the end, so this word means this. I know that sounds like a lot, but really it is the most fabulously easy way that Yah set up his word for a person to pick it up and learn a core amount of information and then be able to pretty much translate. Now obviously there's parts of speech and some other things that go into translation, but when you're picking up something and reading it, you'll be able to pretty much pick out what the words mean and then be able to go through the text and get a general understanding of what you're reading. So we have the noun derivatives, and you can see them here. And there are also, so we have the noun derivatives, we have the plural, and we have the prefixes. So let's look at actually our first word and see. So let's look at our first word and see. Now let's look at our first word, and we're actually going to pull it apart and see how we find the root of the word. So let's look at a word that we're all familiar with. And it's the term, we say Elohim or Alahim. So it's Aleph, Lamed, Hey, Yod, and a Mem Sofit. So these are all letters that we should all know. And it would look something like this. And I suggest that as I say the words, or say the letters, that you pause and take out time to actually write it down for yourself. If you write it down for yourself, then you'll see how we pull the root off. You'll see how we pull the root out, and you'll be able to then follow the process. So, it's the word Elohim or Elohim. And if you take up time, you can actually write this down for yourself as I say the letters, and then you can actually cross off the letters to get a functioning, hands-on idea of what it feels like to pull out the root of the word. So we all know the Aleph and the Lamed, the Hey, the Yod, and the Mem Sofit. These are letters that we should have learned through going through the lesson. So how we find the root in order to look it up is we're actually going to look at this word and look at that list of prefixes and suffixes, and you'll be able to actually pull out where you'll be able to look at that list that I showed you of prefixes, suffixes. You'll be able to look at that list I showed you of prefixes, suffixes, and infixes and see if there are any actually on this word. So in the word Elohim, and I have mine sitting in front of me as well, we're going to go through and say, okay, are there any prefixes? So we'll look through that list and say, okay, is there a mem in the front? Is there a vav in the front? And as we can see through going through the list, there is not. So we can say, okay, the beginning of this word is fine. Now let's look in the middle. Are there any infixes? So look at those infixes, which are these letters that are in the middle. So are there any? So we have an Aleph, a Lamed, and a Hey, so we don't. So we can say, okay, so where do we stop this word then? Are there any prefixes? So we're going to look for the prefix that shows either a plural masculine or a plural feminine. So we're looking toward the end, and actually here we have this combination of Yod and Mem. So you should see this. So that combination of Yod and Mem gives us a plural masculine. We can cross that out as our prefix, and what we're left with is the word Allah. So we can look at this word Allah in the middle, and we have our root. So we can look up Aleph, Lamed, Hey, and this Aleph, Lamed, Hey is the word for Aleph, Lamed, Hey actually literally means ascend. Now there also is the Allah that means curse. So this particular one means to ascend. And the word can also be taken into a two-letter root, which we are familiar with, and it's the word El. So Aleph, Lamed. It can be taken down into a two-letter root, and we can get what the actual meaning of this El is. So it means El means God, or it would be El would be translated into English as God. But we know that this one has a plural, which means El can be translated into English. El should be translated into English as power, not really God, because there are plenty of gods. So it should be translated as power, a strong leader, a power. And because it's plural, then we get the idea of it's not necessarily quantity, but the quality of this strong leader, this power. So we get Elohim, meaning a great power or a great God. So, only through context can we identify quantity versus quality. And so that's very, very, very important. So by knowing that Elohim is Elohim all by himself in other passages of scripture, like he says in Deuteronomy 6:4, where we talk about the Shema, we understand that Yah is one. So we're not dealing with a quantity of gods. We're not dealing with a quantity of powers. We're dealing with the quality of the power. The Hebrew faith was a faith built on one El, one strong leader, one power. Now this strong leader power has many manifestations and how he shows this power, but the power is all based in echad, or one. So by knowing this truth, then whenever you see Elohim in a plural, in this form, and in this context when he's speaking of himself and his creative work, then we know it's him and him all by himself through his powers, through the powers that he possesses that allow him to do the work that only he can do. The next root we're going to uncover is for the word ha'or. And this is found in the Genesis passage. And it's spelled He, Aleph, Cholam, or Vav, with the dot on top, and Resh. So we have in this in this word a prefix and a possible infix, which will actually work out. So we know that He means the, and the word or means light. Now immediately when we look at this, we say, okay, take out the He, and we have or. Let's go look up the word or. In the ancient Hebrew lexicon, you will not find it if you just look for Aleph, Vav, Resh. And the reason why you won't find it is because this word is actually comprised of a two-letter root also. So if you take out the Vav, you have the term Aleph Resh. And that Aleph Resh actually means a box or something that contains something to create order. So the actual definition of Aleph and Resh is order. Interesting thing about how light and order have the same two-letter root or the same root in them is the idea that light also creates order. By shedding light or being bright, it brings forth the order. So it's really interesting that in this one we still can see the consonant, vowel, consonant pattern, but if you were to go look in your ancient Hebrew lexicon, you wouldn't necessarily find it by looking at Aleph, Vav, Resh. But if you found the Aleph and the Resh, within the Aleph, Resh definition, you would see it in there. Now, if you have an etymological dictionary of the Bible, or biblical Hebrew, and you looked up Aleph, Vav, Resh, then it would be there. Because this book is all three-letter roots. So if you go and you turn and go Aleph, Vav, Resh, you'll get the definition for girding or to hold together. So if you go Aleph, Vav, Resh, you get the definition of girding or to hold together, such as to join together or place a belt. Which is very interesting that the light immediately created order in the Genesis account. So from that, you can take the word ha'or and then begin to actually look into and see what actually happened in creation when Yahuwah spoke and said, let there be light, and there was. What was light actually doing? And the interesting thing about Hebrew is that when you see a word, it doesn't only tell what it is, but what it's doing when it's in its place. A lot of our time on lesson, we'll actually do most of our lesson in the work portion of. So this week, most of your lesson will actually be in a hands-on form. So really, I'm just going to come and cover a couple of concepts, and then as you go through the week, there will be work to do in the downloads that will help you understand the concepts that will be necessary in order for us to move to the next phase, which is to show you how to look up these words and find them in the scriptures and in your lexicon so that you can really dive in and get hands-on in looking at and understanding the deeper meaning in Hebrew words. Stay tuned. Shalom, shalom.